Hello and welcome to Celebrating Cinema. If you're here to celebrate cinema, you come to the right place. And if not, maybe stick around. After last episode, we learnt a lot. Tom cries at absolutely everything. But Kiriko apparently cries at nothing. Except our brand new idea of starting a film club. So at the end of the episode, we're going to tell you which film we're going to be watching next episode. But for now, after celebrating cinema on our first episode, Hugo is here to tell you why cinema is perhaps all a lie.
In our first episode, we have established our love for cinema in all of its facets and intricacies, of which there are so many that it prompted this quote from Jean-Luc Godard. Yes, we have a Godard's gone.
Jean-Luc Godard!
Doing. He said, "Film is true 24 times a second, and every cut is a lie." The Austrian auteur Michael Haneke. Do we have a horn of Haneke? Yes, we do.
Michael Haneke.
Boiled this statement down to its natural conclusion. Film is 24 lies per second. So, loving film is akin to loving the lie. If you explore that idea even a bit further, it plunges you down a rabbit hole about the way we perceive film, reality, and ourselves. It makes you think about the way that the media we consume have shaped our perspectives on politics, ideology, representation, and practically life itself. It forces you to pause and think about you consider to be real. Aren't we all just living the stories made up by the selective perceptions of our mind? In times of fake news, deep fakes, and rampant conspiracy theories, these questions remain eerily relevant. I'm reminded by all of this by this fascinating story widely shared after the release of James Cameron's 2009 3D blockbuster Avatar that beautifully rendered the new age CGI world of Pandora, on which the majestic creatures called Na'vi live in close relation with the flora and fauna of their surroundings. People were so in awe of this fantastical and alien place, in the film obviously invaded by colonizing humans, that they experienced an actual bout of depression after leaving the cinema. They thought, why can't our world be like that of the Na'vi? In our current lockdown state, I think we all have a bit of the Pandora blues. I don't know about you, but I get deep aches whenever I see groups of people coming together in films, or when people shake hands, or hug, or dance in a club. I want to live in that world, and not in my world anymore. We're mad as hell now, and we won't take this anymore. In the previous episode, Tom aptly described our need to escape our reality wholesale, and yet it's also important to realize what happens when we get enticed to do so. Lab 111 has been working on a film program that shows the many dangers and challenges of trying to escape our reality. We hope the program will screen soon. From the puzzle narratives of spectacular sci-fi films like Existence and Inception to the ideological paranoia of Total Recall and They Live, these films take you down the rabbit hole and show you that sure, you can escape the surroundings of your reality, but can you ever escape yourself and the structures you grew up in? For this episode, we have watched a film that touches upon all of these themes and also handily reflects on our current stay-at-home bubble state. It's a film that also anticipated the wildly mediated state in which we're all actors now of our own social media accounts. I'm talking, of course, about Peter Weir's 1998 Jim Carrey starring The Truman Show, a marvel of American filmmaking because it's simultaneously deeply moving and extremely funny, but also eerily poignant and perhaps even a little bit prophetic. The Truman Show stars Jim Carrey as Truman Burbank, a man whose entire life has, without his consent, been broadcasted on television as a continuous soap series. His life has been perfectly comfortable though. He has a desk job, a caring wife, a good friend, and then some more. But nonetheless, he feels that something doesn't add up when he starts to question the nature of his surroundings. Using Truman's quest of self-fulfillment as a departure point, this episode will deal with the opaque relationship between fiction and real life, about the way films have shaped our perception of the world and the way we allow stories to fuck with our mind. I'm joined, as always, by
Kiriko, what's good?
And
Tom, hello there.
Hey. And the first question I like to ask Kiriko and Tom is inspired, of course, by the Truman Show. Do you ever liken your life to be like a movie or a series? What's the moment in your life that you would describe as being the most cinematic?
Ooh. I mean, that's a hard one because it's always the question, like, to what extent would this be something I would see from a movie? Or to what extent are these my real feelings? And do I just relate to them because I'm generally touched by film? Like, I'm sure you recognize this, but there used to be these moments, especially when I was a child or a teenager, where you would sit in a car and have your head like bump against the window and have your headphones in and listen to dramatical music and totally believe that moment that you were in a movie at that moment. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe if we didn't have movies, would we still feel that way at that moment in the car? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like, we automatically think of our life through films because we know films so intimately, maybe.
Exactly. Also, when it comes to every romantic moment in my life, I'm not sure who created romance for me.
How about you, Tom?
Now, the first thing that popped into my mind, and it hits that problem, is years ago I was in Tokyo, and I woke up because there was an earthquake outside. And buildings in Tokyo are built on these weird sort of flexible...
Flexible platforms.
Flexible platforms. That's fine. So the entire building was swaying from left to right and from front to center. And I woke up and I tried to stand up, and I fell down immediately. And I thought, what is happening? Like slightly dazed because I was still a bit asleep. So I walked to the window. And it was this huge building, so I could look down and saw all the other sort of skyscrapers moving as well. I looked down and I saw a ballroom with dancers in there who were dancing, but also slightly distracted because of something. And they started falling over. And it was this classic ballroom scene, like, so that was like a wooden floor and too much light and mirrors and stuff like that. And then I realized the building was moving and it was an earthquake. And I did this classic thing, which I think makes no sense. I started standing in the doorpost because that's like the myth that you have to stand in the doorpost.
Movies told you.
Also, the sort of the weekend I had there, which ended up being heavily karaoke infused and lots of Suntory times. I was in Lost in Translation. But I was only in Lost in Translation because I knew that movie.
For relaxing times, make it Suntory time.
Would that feeling be the same if I didn't know that film? Or is still the sort of feeling that's emanated in Lost in Translation something you can... You know what I mean? Where does that start? Is the film actually telling you about that feeling, and then you relate to it because you've seen that now that feeling suddenly has become lost in translation?
Good one, man. I mean,
it's like, does bring us to the core of, this episode. Does fiction shape our reality, or does our reality shape our fiction, or is there something complex at play? This interplay between the two things. Maybe it's a good idea to just pick up the Truman Show and kind of take that as, a vessel to discuss these kind of things, because we watched it for this episode. It's a 1998 film. It's more than 20 years old already, and yet it feels incredibly poignant and relevant now. What did you think of it?
Well, while looking at it, I kept trying to see how the Truman Show was part of my life or modern day life. And I kept going back to Brittany Spears because in so many ways, I mean, of course, what you were saying earlier, also, we can relate to the Truman Show in the way we relate or shape our own lives on social media and such, and how very often, especially when you live in a big city, you have the idea that you're part of something that's bigger than just your own life. But man, Brittany Spears, she is modern day Truman, no? Like,
yeah. Recently there was, of course, this documentary released framing Brittany Spears.
I haven't seen it yet, but I have a date to see it next week, and I'm so excited.
Yeah, I recently saw that film, and I do see a lot of overlap. Britney Spears' life was like totally sheltered in many ways from the outside world, and she is often unable from the inside to look out, although everybody in the world is able from outside to look into her life. So there's a similar kind of dynamic there, yeah. And it's like the whole world is banking on her star power and presence and charisma and all of these things. And she gets so little in return, except for artifice.
And it's also funny how the way in which the Truman Show is written, you can sort of follow the decay of Truman's belief in is what you said earlier, the nature of his surroundings, which really I had Britney Spears in my head from the beginning of the movie when I was watching. You could sort of follow the same script of Britney Spears decaying in the same way of where she becomes more and more radical in defending herself against her reality, where, you know, she at one point shaves her head and with the umbrella and everything, and to the point where she has come now. I don't know. I thought it was quite fascinating. Yeah, make that correlation.
Yeah, it's you touch upon the most tragic aspect of the film, of course, that this Truman character, he is gradually becoming more aware of how he's trapped in a system that doesn't make sense anymore for him, and the only way out is through erratic behavior and destruction and almost very close to violence. Although it's not that dark of a film, it does bring him very close to the idea of violence and acting violently against the people in his surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that he is forced, to bring himself to these places. Tom, did you have another very outgoing association with the Truman Show like Britney Spears? What celebrity do you want to bring in the mix?
Q. I'd like to bring Q into this conversation because if you look at it, it also feels like I just kept thinking about if you look at how a lot of people have radicalized at the way they sort of perceive reality now. Of course, everything is the higher powers that be, like the Christoph in the Moon is a pedophile network at the Pizza Hut.
You are all perverts.
So you can easily bring that comparison in. So yeah, as you said, like he rebels towards a system that might be doing its best to be real.
Was nothing real?
You were real. That's what made you so good to watch.
And then he finds out it's not true. The whole thing, of course, of sheep waking up, which is something that keeps popping up if you see people online talking about how the virus is a hoax or anything like that. And we sheep haven't seen how reality really is. The veil needs to be taken away, and behind the curtain there is this very dark sort of reality. Behind that curtain is something else. That's also something very interesting. I don't want to spoil the movie, but of course the thing about him wanting to get out of the dome that he is literally in, the bubble that he's literally in.
Day 93 under the dome.
Is the movie doesn't, apart from the audience's reactions to the show, doesn't really show us the world outside. Is him waking up better than being in that bubble? Or is it better to live in the illusion, the fantasy that was portrayed for him or sort of conjured up for him?
Yeah.
I find that very interesting.
I like the QAnon, reference, because there's a moment in the film where you see this structure with these arches and it says unus pro omnibus, omnes pro uno, one for all and all for one, which is very closely related to the QAnon thing, where we go one, we go all. So I was like, very much Q-pilled here. But so we have Britney Spears as the specter of Britney Spears on the one hand. We have the radicalization theory of the Jim Carrey character on the other hand, as this kind of
and also very much
up.
Simulation theory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when this movie came out, this was a very rampant thing that even in psychology, there is the Truman syndrome, where people actually went to the psychiatrist and told them that they were living in a reality show and they were being filmed all the time. There are like many cases of this. And of course, you can sort of put that blueprint on how people are functioning now. I can imagine that if you are very much into conspiracy theories and you look at this film, it actually tells you that what you are feeling is true, man. True, man.
True. Man.
But also on a smaller scale, like if you would dim down the essence of the film and apply it to your own personal life on the idea of how we perceive our perfect lives to be as perfect as they appear to be. Well, I mean, it's basically the blue or red pill question, right? But the moment in which the director of the Truman Show asks Truman, are you sure that you want to get outside of the dome and go into the real world and face reality in the way it presents to you? It's a question I think we are still asking ourselves many times in daily life as well. So, I mean, of course, we can go into the direction of the people who have no belief in all the things that they see around them, but also it's something that everyone has internalized in some way or another.
Yeah, it's kind of like this sorting machine where some people end up on the deck that doesn't take anything that they see at face value anymore, and some people that still see maybe some reality in the tangible world. What I think is maybe the most prescient moment of the film is then where Truman accepts that he wants to, leave his bubble and try to find the real world.
Go to Fiji.
And go to Fiji, which is a good fantasy escape in its own way,
Exactly.
but that he then still, for a final time, embraces his kind of TV personality performance and still gives them the...
In case I don't see ya. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
And then he goes on, and I think that's a moment that I can really relate with our social media age, where we are, even if we tap out of social media, we are aware of the performance of tapping out of social media, right?
Definitely.
And the kind of ritualistic way how many people go on their social media, retreat for a little while, make a post explaining why they've been gone for so long, then being there for a little while, and then doing the same thing over and over again. It's like that is a condensed version of the Truman trajectory in some ways. So I think that's a very interesting part of the film, and that's maybe the whole new media, internet kind of connotation that we have around it now. I think besides all very tangible, kind of dark sides of the film, there's also a very bright side that I also want to briefly touch upon, because we're not only here to, question reality, but maybe also appreciate the fiction. And a thing that really struck me with seeing this film is just that it's maybe peak Hollywood comedy as well, and peak Jim Carrey comedy. It's one of the most joyful films I've seen in a very long time, but that might also be because I just spent a whole week watching the new films from the Berlin Film Festival, and most of them are very miserable, but there's just something incredibly joyful and spontaneous and funny about the film, and it utilizes Jim Carrey to such a perfect degree. So I wanted to maybe also ask you what you thought, let's say, the bright side of Sea Haven, the island where Truman is stuck in.
I found it fascinating to read that actually originally the script was the script is written by Andrew Niccol, who also wrote the script for Gattaca, which is a great sci-fi movie about genetics. It was apparently incredibly dark and set in New York, and Peter Weir wanted to have it in this lush, idyllic sea-coastal town so that it wouldn't feel like a sci-fi movie. Because of that choice, it also feels incredibly superficial and very thought-provoking at the same time. The movie feels like escapism to something wonderful, but the movie is about escaping from something wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing, the setting works so well here, because if it would have been set in New York, problem with New York, although it is a very cinematic city, is that city feels so real in many sense. It's the most realistic city that we maybe know, the perfect grid-like planning of it, the constant aware, like it's always awake, it's always there, it's such a diverse place. Maybe New York would be a too real place, which is what Synecdoche in New York perfectly captures as well. It's impossible to constantly try to recreate New York because New York will always be New York, right?
Yeah.
So this kind of taking this suburbia anxiety and showing that it can be on the surface level a seemingly perfect place where your best friends come over to barbecues on Saturday evenings, and there's a new set of kitchen appliances in the store that you can get.
It's a chef's pal. It's a dicer, grater, peeler, all in one. Never needs sharpening, dishwasher safe.
Wow.
And all of those things seem great and comfortable, except for when it doesn't anymore, and then it does feel like you're stuck, right? The suburbia anxiety in this film works very well for me. And then the resentment of the Truman character through Jim Carrey's erratic performance becomes so much more, fleshed out and interesting for me, because it, as if all of the things has been working against his biological psyche almost or something. It goes very deep for me. I think is a masterful choice that Peter Weir made, which again makes me realize that he is an incredibly good director who made really good films and then kind of disappeared, which is a shame as well.
Connecting to that, how do you feel about his relationship or Crystal's relationship with Truman? Do you want him to leave? Of course, he's directing him. I find the relationship very caring, but he does try to kill him in the end.
God's sake, Chris. The whole world is watching. We can't let him die in front of a live audience.
He was born in front of a live audience.
I mean, just the whole idea of putting someone into a trauma that is literally confining someone to literal borders of a place that you can't get out to. I mean, that's insane, no? Like,
we now have terms for that, like gaslighting, right? And that is exactly, it is a masterclass in gaslighting in many ways. I really like that about the film as well, how easy it is to retroactively kind of take some elements out of the film and shape your current worldview around them a little bit. But yeah, Christoph as the director of the Truman Show, the show that, stars our Jim Carrey character, there's two things. I think that when he tries to kill him, he doesn't try to kill him. He knows his character better than anybody in the world. This is maybe a bit of an auteurist take, that I place a lot of confidence in the director, but I think he knows Truman so well that he will rise up to the occasion and not die when he's in this little sailboat, the lightning crashing down on him. I think he knows that he will pull through and that it will make excellent television. And it's those two things that are, his driving force, or maybe it's the two things that he excels in, is knowing his character through and knowing how to exploit him in the best possible manner. I think that's a fascinating dynamic. What I am more concerned about is the female character in the film that is Truman's partner, because, if you think too much about the Truman Show, a lot of things become very icky.
How can anyone expect me to carry on under these conditions? It's unprofessional!
The almost prostitute-like aspect where she is, enticed to be in a marriage, and it is a Hollywood film, so luckily we don't have to see it, but I am wondering what the Truman sex life would look like.
But all these people living in Sea Haven are also living within the confines of a reality that's not real. Maybe their lives are even worse because they know. Truman, at some point, Truman, of course, also knows that this is not real. But these people really know it's not true.
Yeah,
they have to be somebody, and after around 1:00, they have to have lunch behind an elevator, as was one wonderful scene in the film where he tries to go in the elevator and the wall is still there, it's still gone.
Silly sandwiches.
Yeah, people eating sandwiches. Oh man, it's like, just imagine working in that dome, being not yourself every day, just for one guy.
Job.
Just for one guy.
For years
but also,
and years and years.
But also for millions of people watching across the world. So it's like being part of this bigger thing. And we also have soaps, right? We have Goede Tijden, Slechte Tijden that runs forever on TV. And I mean, you basically do the same thing. You're maybe a third tier cast member of a soap series. It's not that different. You brought in Christoph, who's, played by Ed Harris. He's the big director, the god, as you will, of the Truman world. It might be good to prompt this question to you guys, because we were talking in the beginning a little bit about, how your life can be related to a movie. But say your life has to be adapted to a film. What would be the director? Who would be the director of the film of your life story?
Kiriko? Go ahead.
I mean, on one hand, I could be very realistic and say, who would be the director who would be able to capture my life as it is right now at its best, which I think would be like so boring and also stressful. Like,
yeah, what European art house director are you gonna choose?
I mean, no, like I'm especially focusing on the stress part, which is part of our daily life. Like thinking of movies that cause stress. I mean, maybe the Safdie brothers. but I mean, on the other hand, I would like to have a director who's nice to me, who makes me laugh but cries well. Just Agnes Varda, maybe. I mean, then I know that I'll be in good hands, I mean, it's not possible anymore, unfortunately.
You've lived a nice life if it's directed by
and
Agnes Varda.
you'll be doing fun things. You'll go to the beach, you'll dance, you'll go to
Except
Paris,
for when
whatever.
the film is called Vagabond and it's about this lady that's, homeless and trying to traverse the French landscape and everything is miserable. But that's an exception in your...
Also very real in a way.
Yeah. How about you, Tom?
Well, there you go, by the way. So you want to step away from the real. So
Go
you
back
want
to the fiction.
To the fiction. So you want to have your life fictionalized. Oh boy, yeah, I don't know. The first thing that popped into my mind was Michelangelo Antonioni.
Michelangelo Antonioni.
Which is
Do we
also...
have the Antonioni alarm, Elliot?
Put on the
We're for the
Antonioni
drama.
alarm. Oh boy, yeah. No, and I have no idea why, really. Maybe also because life is really miserable.
Oh, honey.
Oh, Tom, can we do something?
But I agree with you. Like, I find Varda a very nice... maybe I would like my life to be directed by a woman.
Yeah. Duh.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's funny because I have director.
Oh
in
no,
mind
you're
that-
gonna say Clint
No,
Eastwood, right?
no, I also have a female director in mind who's also from France. It's
Oh.
Mia Hansen-Løve, which I think
Oh.
would be a perfect director for anybody's life because she just takes it at such face value with so much authenticity. Have you ever seen a film of hers? Kiko?
No, who's
No.
that?
There's,
Me neither.
well, I haven't seen all of her films, but one of my favorite films of hers is called Eden, and it's very topical now because Daft Punk broke up. But it's a film about her brother who was in the French house scene of the 1990s and was a peer of also Daft Punk and other people because he was also an electronic musician and DJ. And he had gotten pretty far in the scene and, he rid the wave for quite a while. But then, every wave somehow also slams across some shore and
Even the
simmers
French New
away.
Wave.
Even the French New Wave. Do we have an alarm for that?
Oh yeah, we definitely need one for that.
and just with the most delicate and sensitive approach, she shows how the things that you're passionate about can take you to great lengths, but also can only take you so far in this thing we call life. And then you just have to find ways to reinvent yourself, which is difficult if you become more old. So there's this sensitivity in her work, also related to the creative industry. Many of her characters are, either writers or academics or musicians. So I can kind of, in many ways, relate to those people and then also relate to how, I'm still young, but how those things that give you very good feels maybe not be forever, which is a good thing to be aware of, not too much, because then you won't be able to enjoy it while it lasts. But, it's a good thing to have in mind. So she's kind of like my guiding director, maybe.
I love
that shapes my
how well thought out this.
Yeah, well, he was posing the question. He thought about this all week.
Yeah.
That's the luxury of asking
yeah.
the question. You can also think of the answer a little bit more.
Nice. Elliot, how about you?
I'm glad you've asked.
Clint Eastwood.
Close. There's one moment that sticks out in my mind that could perhaps be turned into a film. And it'd have to be directed by Sylvester Stallone.
Who are you?
Your worst nightmare.
Why
Damn,
not?
okay.
Because in a past life, I did this thing where you learn to box in 8 weeks and then you fight someone in front of 1,000 people. And I can see Sylvester Stallone sort of recreating the Rocky of the 21st century. And
Damn.
It doesn't matter how hard you hit. It matters how hard you can get hit.
and my nickname was the Florist.
I must break you.
The florist?
Yeah, because my last name's Bloom.
Nice.
Oh
And
my
so I
God.
can see Rocky sort of fleshing something out.
Your friends call you the florist?
No, what? just people who fight.
We should now call him the florist.
Yeah,
Really.
for sure.
I arranged their flower arrangement at their deathbed.
It sounds.
Was
you
it
sound
was
like
a real
John Wick
knockout.
character.
Am I right?
But there you go.
Nice.
Well, that was entirely unexpected. Thank you for that. Well, what I was thinking about as well, we were talking about this a little bit, how Jim Carrey's character, Truman, how his perception of the world is also radically altered by the environment in which he is in, right? His director kind of shapes his outlook on life, sometimes quite literally. For instance, he wants to be an explorer of the world when he's young, but then he gets conditioned to fear the sea.
I want to get away. See some of the world. Explore.
Honey, you want to be an explorer. This'll pass.
Whenever he wants to go to a travel agency to book a ticket to Fiji, there are posters with airplanes that are struck by thunder and it says it could happen to you. So it maybe not be the most wisest thing to go, and book a plane ticket if you want to live. In the Truman Show world, that is. A question from me for you would be how, films that you have seen maybe also changed your perception, because we've been talking about the Truman Show. I've been talking about Pandora and Avatar, at least, how a lot of people got swept up by this amazing imagery and made them feel and see things in their own life that weren't up to standards of modern day CGI. So are there films kind of, shaped your outlook on the world or on life?
I mean, probably every movie I've ever seen changed my life in some way or another, subconsciously.
Process.
Yeah. To an extent where you believe a reality. I mean, the whole thing we're talking about, that you don't really know to what extent you recognize a pattern or you recognize something in reality that may have come from a pattern from cinema. But I kept thinking also while watching about documentaries about people who sort of turned their own life into a Truman Show. I don't know if you're familiar with the film called The Wolf Pack.
Yeah.
About these group of brothers who actually live in New York, and they, I think, have a horrible father who confines these 5 or 6 brothers to the walls of the apartment that they live in, and all they do is watch film and create their own reality based on all the fiction that they see, which I thought was such a nice way to become the director of your own fiction, which then becomes your reality.
Yeah, that's funny because it also makes you wonder what kind of media is Truman able to consume in his confined space, and how does that change his perception of the world? Because, you see that he responds to newspapers and the radio, but the TV, because he's maybe himself a protagonist on television, is strangely absent from his life. We've never seen him in a movie theater, so what is he able to see from America?
There's a film on TV. There's like this TCM channel that's on at some point, and there you see that they are gonna screen. There's an announcement for a film that's all about the great essence of family life.
The enduring, much-loved classic, Show Me the Way to Go Home. A hymn of praise to small-town life where we learn that you don't have to leave home to discover what the world's all about, and that no one is poor who has friends.
Because, of course, they want to sort of get him back into that.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, because all the media he consumes is directly communicating with him to also, I think it's also the radio is literally telling him, like answering the questions that he's posing, basically.
Oh, that's an interesting one, the Wolfpack, as a sort of almost reverse Truman show where they know they're confined to a bubble and they know that the outside world exists, but they don't know how far it stretches or something. But they have film as a way to break out of that bubble.
Yeah.
Which feels like a good metaphor for real life in some ways as well.
Yeah. And I think another good example of this, which I can very much relate to, is the film I mentioned last week as one of my favorite films, The Act of Killing, is also a movie about people who've done horrible things based on very cool mafia films that they've seen, trying to recreate their own life into something that's very cool and manly and macho and whatever. And the moment in which the fantasy, or actually the fiction and the reality collide, is the moment in which they realize that they're not living in a movie, which is also, I think, a very Truman-ish reality.
And it's very powerful, and it very much relates to the first question that I asked all of you, this, how do you fashion your life as a film? And they did that. And there's been grave consequences for having that awareness, because it maybe also gives you the sense that you're just a character in a fiction, and it makes it easier to do things. And
exactly.
get away with doing things, because that's part of what movies are about. You do bad things in films because that's what advances the plot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, that maybe brings me already, Tom, sorry to sidetrack you here, but that brings me at this, maybe final concluding note, this relationship that we've been exploring now with reality versus the fiction, how those two things collide. Kiko, it might be a good question as well for you. We've been talking a lot about fiction films, The Truman Show here, and Pandora of Avatar there. And you've been talking a little bit about how we can apply those ideas to documentary filmmaking. So we're going to get into that in the next episode, but maybe can you give us a little bit, what are some of the concerns maybe when we apply those kind of thoughts to documentary?
I mean, that's a very big question that you're asking there, but of course I'm a very big believer that documentaries are hugely underappreciated, because there's this misconception that documentaries present the reality to you as they are, and then documentaries that are, for example, put in scene or situations that have been created are lies. Like you have these huge lists of people who enjoy creating lists of documentaries that are lying, which I'm not sure if that's true. I think in a lot of ways documentaries are trying to tell universal truth in the same way that fiction does, and to get to a truth that is universal, you may have to pull out elements of people that they would generally not show when there's a camera put in front of them. Yeah. Which I find that very fascinating. Of course, everything you create is a lie when you're putting a person in front of a camera, because no one acts the same way they do when they have a camera in front of them. Truman is the example of that. So yeah, I hope we're going to get into it a little bit more next week, but I think it's also just something to keep in mind when watching documentaries, that the idea of reality and lies and cinema and what that means and how you look at a scene and how it's cut, and everything at the end comes to bringing a truth or a belief that the director wants to give to you.
Yeah, it makes me think of this specific definition of documentaries as a creative treatment of reality.
And that's exactly what it is.
Could also apply to the world of the Truman Show, which is literally what our director also says, that although it is kind of a construct, what happens in it is very much real for Truman.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
So yeah, a creative treatment of reality. That's maybe a good way to end it with, but then as a final concluding note, I would like to know from both of you maybe what's your other favorite kind of mindfuck film that stacks up these questions of reality and fiction in these ways. Because Tom, you're making a program surrounding these rabbit hole kind of films for a lab. Could you maybe, give a little scoop or a little insight of the kind of films you're thinking about or that triggered this kind of program?
Yeah, well, the program came to being due to everything that's due to the situation that we're in right now, life feeling like a movie or feeling like something that should be unreal. So I was working on this program called Down the Rabbit Hole, which compromises mostly of films that either doubt reality or treat reality in such a way where there might be an alternate reality. So it's movies like, I'll just name a few because it's a long list, but it goes from Total Recall.
You are not you. You're me. No shit.
To Mulholland Drive as well, which is of course more about the relationship between the real and the dream, which is Lynch's stokpaardje. I'm not even going to translate that. And Being John Malkovich, Dogtooth by Yorgos Lanthimos. And these are all films that I like very much. So I am very much interested in this. It might be simulation theory, or maybe in the thought that we are living in, or maybe I should phrase it differently. Maybe the thought of, is this all there is, right? What I love about the Truman Show is that the woman that he falls in love with is wearing this pin that I always wanted to get as a tattoo, actually, which reads, how is it going to end?
Yeah.
Which is like this big question, like, is this it? What will happen? Is there more to life than this simulation that we're living in right now? Which is actually one of the reasons that I want to do this program, is that there's a new documentary by the director who made Room 237, which is about all the conspiracies.
Yeah.
Some wonderful and some absolutely bonkers. But yeah, as you say, it taps into, did Stanley Kubrick film the moon landing? Is it enough that he just made a film about maybe a hotel on an Indian burial ground being very creepy? So, and that documentary it's called A Glitch in the Matrix. It goes very deep into this simulation theory thought, actually using a speech by Philip K. Dick, who at that point in his life, I believe in the 70s or in the 80s, tells a French audience that for his entire life he had been feeling that he was living in a simulation, and that all his books, if you read things like, well, novel that Total Recall is based on, for instance, and even
Androids Dream
exactly,
of Sheep.
Blade Runner, it's like there's this sort of sub-reality or an alternate reality that's actually informing life now. And of course, that's the whole Matrix thing. We're actually lying in a pod, and where everything around us is fake. Which actually ties into one thing that I want to ask you guys now. One of my favorite things in these movies happens in The Matrix, and is when Agent Smith gives Cypher the opportunity to actually remain in the Matrix. Because of course there's this thing you can unplug, exactly, blue pill, and then you can sort of unplug from reality that we live in.
And so stay in the Matrix, man.
Come into Zion. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, my favorite scene in the Matrix is he's having steak with Agent Smith, and Cypher's describing, wonderful performance by Joe Pantoliano, by the way, but that he's describing that he knows the steak is not real, but he just doesn't care.
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious.
He just doesn't care. It's better than the sort of milky slur that they're eating in the Nebuchadnezzar spaceship underneath Zion with all the robots around them. Fuck that. Give me the Matrix. I deeply empathize with Cypher. As do you, apparently, Kiriko.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I don't think I empathize with Cypher. I mean, it maybe also really depends on how much consciousness you will bring back into the Matrix, because I don't think I would be able to live with the betrayal of turning my back against reality and then being aware of that I did that. I think the taste of the steak will gradually get worse.
You want to stay in Wonderland.
I would stay in Wonderland, fight the crappy robots, eat the mediocre slob, because I would live to see the day to be in the Matrix Reloaded and dance, the insane death drive rave before the robots come and kill us all. And it would be probably the best experience of my life.
I hope you'll get there, man.
If I get there.
That's quite a positive way to probably end.
How is it going to end? Well, at this note. Thank you all for the critical concerns and the very interesting perspectives on fiction and reality. Thank you all for listening this week. We hope to see you at the next episode. And if we don't, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
And if you want to stick around and find out for our film club what's going to be our first film, it's going to be Seeds of Deceit, which has actually been turned into a series, which you can find on MPO. And it's by the brilliant Miriam Gutmann, who is going to be joining us next week, all about documentary